Hi there, and welcome to Author Conversations. I'm Chris Dabbs, and today I'm joined by David Dye, who's author of Do Not Open, a historical supernatural thriller that's inspired by one of the world's most unsettling maritime mysteries. Whoa. Now, David has had a fascinating career path, from law enforcement on one hand to technology training and quantitative finance, and now fiction writing. Now, that unusual background feeds directly into the investigative style of his storytelling, combining real history, classified secrets, and mythology with supernatural suspense. Oh, I can't wait to get into this, David. So, the novel begins in 1947 when the crew of the SS Silver Star discovers a drifting ghost ship in the Strait of Malacca. On board, they find every crew member dead, their faces frozen in terror, and alongside a cryptic Morse code message, the lid has been opened. Well, from there, the story stretches across decades of hidden history, secret Nazi occult experiments, Unit 731, ancient legends, wartime mysteries, and the strange case of the Somerton Man, all connected by a mysterious ancient amulet believed to carry extraordinary power. David, after that intro, welcome to Author Conversations. I can't wait to talk to you.
Thank you.
So, okay, let's start off with a nice, easy one, really. I mean, where did you get the idea for the book?
So my two boys and I would watch Discovery Channel quite often. It was something when they were young, it was age appropriate. And we had, watched Unsolved Mysteries and like all of those. And, after they grew up and left, um, I started watching one of those shows again, Unsolved Mysteries. And I was like, what if I could go ahead and take all of these unsolved mysteries and lore and tie them together and actually say, here's what caused them, all throughout time. The Ourang Medan was probably one of the most interesting because, it's still, is it lore or is it fact? And there was enough fact in there and documentation to make you wonder. I mean, you have to decide for yourself. So, yeah, with the ship and exactly what happened, the first argument that comes up is the ship was never registered, which makes sense because they were smugglers. So they're not going to register their ship. Um, so, exactly what did happen and did it happen was unknown, except, going back, I was able to find that there were articles written, um, mostly from Germany, Denmark, that delved into the story and said, here's what happened. It was interesting too, because back at the time, unlike modern communications, the relay stations and the ships didn't keep logs of the Morse code, which is the SOS that was sent. So there's no way to say definitively that yes or no, it didn't happen. And the more that I went into it, I was able to find a CIA document that mentioned the Ourang Medan, and that said a lot of the travels, this could be travel dangers that we have today, really could be part of what had happened with the Ourang Medan. And then come to find out that one of the maritime um, publications actually documented the Ourang Medan. So, which goes back to, just because it's documented, they didn't have the internet at the time, so you couldn't YouTube it, you couldn't stream on FaceTime, but you could be able to say, at that time, if it's written down, then people took that as it's no longer lore. This must have happened, or someone's taken the time to write it down. So I started there because that was the most intriguing and enough background to be able to make you question, did it happen or didn't it? And I kind of worked backwards and said, okay, so it starts with the Ourang Medan, but then, what caused it? And then went back into time and, kind of picked out other mysteries. While I was writing it, I was tried to keep as much historical fact as possible. So a lot of the people that are in the book actually existed at the time. They may not have been doing the exact, for example, in Normandy, I had one of the shipmates, and he did exist, but he wasn't a shipmate. He was actually a doctor that they called Dr. Satan, because he was disbarred from medicine. I was like, all right, that he was in Normandy, he was a doctor, he was evil. I'll use that as part of the background of the character. So it was fun going back and trying to say, okay, how can I string these together? The difficulty was keeping the timeline straight, to make sure that it if I veered off by 2, 3 years, then people are going to be like, that was 2, 3 years too early or too late. So just going back and trying to tie these back together it was fun. And my wife and I spent quite some time traveling to like we went to Belgium, France, England, New York, Ellis Island, um, Italy, Spain, to do the background of the research. So a lot of the places are actually real. We visit them, hotels, restaurants, the neighborhoods. So yeah, it was fun to write and research, and to be able to see, ooh, yeah, that couldn't have happened because here's what it looked like at the time.
Wow. So this is the kind of thing where your attention to detail really works, doesn't it? I
Yes.
mean, yeah, because at the end of the day, you were what, a police officer, and then you went to become what, a trainer at Microsoft and stuff.
As a
So,
Microsoft SQL Server trainer. Yeah.
wow, okay, SQL Server, eh?
Yeah.
Well, that just scares me when I hear that. But yeah, I mean, this is the amazing thing. So I guess this is what attracted you to writing stories that kind of blur the line then between fact and legend or lore, as you were putting it, right?
Right. Yes. Yeah, that was the whole point. I mean, to try and decide what's fact, what's fiction, what's lore, mythology. And even in the book, with mythology, mythology is generally what you can't explain. Back in the time, then it fell back to mythology, and here's what causes a solar eclipse. Here's what causes tsunamis, things like that. That they couldn't explain it. They didn't have the science at the time, so they used mythology.
Imagine living like that. That would have been, I said, well, one way it would be quite good, wouldn't it? Because you just wouldn't know. But I
Right.
think, yeah, and you're right. The internet, we're spoiled now. I think we can do whatever
Yes.
we want. But this is one of the issues, isn't it? Like the opening premise of the book, right, is I think deeply unsettling here because it feels plausible. So, I mean, was creating that sense of this might actually have happened, this actually might have happened and is real, important to you?
Yeah, it was. I wanted to go through, and like I said, I wanted as much fact as possible. And during my research, and then trying to tie everything back together, like for example, Unit 731 was a unit I had never heard of. And, when I researched it and found just the heinous crimes that they were doing, and, after they were found out, and some were arrested and tried, a lot of whom, the doctors and the researchers, were given light sentences in order to work on projects for Russia, for other countries. So, I thought that was a disturbing fact that I forget how I had come across it, but I was like, this really fits into the story quite well, or I can make it fit into the story. And that
Yeah.
was one of the reasons that one of the theories that the Ourang Medan exploded is because they were carrying hazardous materials, smuggling hazardous materials. And I thought, well, why not? It could be materials from Unit 731. So that would make sense.
Yeah, yeah. So what did Unit 731 actually get up to then? What were they up to?
Unit 731. So um, back in the 40s, there was a war with China and Japan that was started by the Manchurian Incident, where Japan staged an attack, making it look like it was from China, which then allowed or gave them the justification to attack China. During the attack of China, they took over the Manchurian province, and that's where they set up Unit 731. So, Unit 731 was mainly biomedical and chemical weapons. At one time, they infected fleas with syphilis and dropped them into a village to see how that would affect them. They did experiments like freezing someone's limbs and then thawing it to see what type of effect it had. So they truly heinous crimes. But they relied on chemicals, biochemical, and human experimentation just to see where they said a bullet can kill one person, a bomb can kill many indiscriminately, but we want to be able to target, biochemicals or chemicals or, frailty of humans and disease and see how we can target and affect thousands.
Well, yeah, okay. I see where you're going there then. So it's lucky that we're not talking about gene therapy, even though they're probably on their way to doing something like that. Well, not therapy even, but gene warfare, right?
Yes.
But oh, okay, all right. Well, that's enough of that bit, I think. But let's move on to the amulet then, because that feels almost like a like its own character, doesn't it? I mean,
Yes.
when did that central idea first come to you?
Um, Actually, when I looked at the Ourang Medan, and well, I looked at I picked 7 different mysteries and lores and said, what could these be tied together and how could it be? And the amulet just was low hanging fruit. It was something that, to release the evil, but the amulet, when at the end of the story, I go into how the amulet was created. And, it wasn't just one event. There were 3 different events that created that amulet, each of which had its own supernatural power or power or effect. So, tying that together, and then putting it within the story, and then showing that just it's not truly evil. It depends on who's holding it, the intentions of who has it.
And so, what could it actually, without giving us too much, what could it have been used for if it was not entirely evil?
Um, so it was based after Pandora's box, which was a mistranslation. It was a vase. And so the amulet, I thought, well, other than just a vase, what if it was an amulet of a vase? And then inscribed on it said, "Do not open." And that was in the story of Pandora. Um, Zeus sent Pandora down to punish humankind. And he said, since she was made human, then he knew curiosity would be her downfall. And what would make you more curious than to carry an amulet around your neck, always staring at it that says, "Do not open," wondering, why shouldn't I open it? What's inside? So, um, in the myth, all the evils of the world were placed within Pandora's box, within the vase, the amulet. And when it was opened, then Ellipsis was the only one not to leave, and that was hope. So Zeus had put hope within the amulet, but ordered you won't leave. So in one part of the story, I mean, again, kind of to fit it to my needs, hope was still within the vase. So depending upon who had the amulet and what their intentions were, what their heart was, then it didn't mean it was going to release the evils of the world again. That hope could still be released. And in one story that actually, when it was opened, it did show that, you know, fighting stopped and, that was without ruining that part, but it showed that hope had been released.
See, well, yeah, well, that's great. I mean, it's nice to know that there is something that these things can be used for, these supernatural kind of elements or amulets. Okay, so you mentioned this already, but I think it's probably worth diving into it a bit more for any authors that are listening and looking for tips on this, right? I mean, the book moves through obviously multiple periods of history and different global events at the same time. But how difficult was it to structure something so ambitious without losing narrative momentum? And also, how did you keep track across all that time?
So I started out with an outline that was always evolving. And I began writing. And like I said, the Ourang Medan was one of the most compelling stories, mysteries, lore that I had found. So I figured this is a good place to start. It was easy to write. It came to me, and after that, that's when I said, okay, do I go forward? Do I go backwards? Um, in the story, Tommy is really has no redeeming qualities whatsoever. He wasn't a real person, but his brother was a real person. Um, and George Edward Ellison, he was British Expeditionary Force. He was at the first Battle of Mons, the Angel of Mons, and he was the last British Expeditionary Force soldier to be killed in Mons 90 minutes before the armistice had been signed. So I was like that with the history of that. I added a brother, and I was asked, why did you change the name? And the reason was because I didn't feel right to have a war hero and then anchor him down with this terrible brother that didn't exist. But, you know, George Edward Ellison was based on a real person. And then I just began to follow it throughout time. And, I worked backwards, and then went ahead and moved forward. So as I was writing it, like the outline was a good part. I did a lot of research. And like I said, I tried to find time relevant people, events, places, and I was able to do that. And then, I would have to go back and rewrite. I had an editor at the time when I first started writing this, and, I would do maybe 3 10 pages a day at first, and he would give me back 1 or 2. And he's like, look, just write, that was the best advice I had gotten. He said, just write. I'll take care of the editing. Don't worry about your grammar. Just write the ideas down, and then we'll go through them. So after he gave me that advice, it went much faster. And he said, don't overread it. Don't spend time before you start writing again. Don't read what you wrote before. Just continue writing. Read the last paragraph, start writing again. And that really did help. That was something that, I started turning out more pages. I think out of 282, there was well over 350, before we got started narrowing it down.
You see, but this is great though, isn't it? And it's exactly what you want an editor to do, isn't it? Guide
Yes.
you and advise you and act as a mentor, right? So yeah, well, excellent. Well, I think we always try to yeah, just get there really. I'm trying to think how can I explain how I would feel holding myself back from writing because I wanted it to be perfect, if you
Right.
see what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, isn't it? Because it's so close to you that you want to make sure that it's done, especially, that you've got such a strong kind of cinematic quality to the story, especially in those maritime scenes. I mean, did you actually, when you were doing this and writing it and all that, were you visualizing it as almost like a film while you were writing it?
I didn't have that idea at first. I had some advanced readers, and they were all like, this would be better as a movie. And so, as I started going through it, I think I wanted to keep the same feel, so it flowed. But I actually had someone that has come to me, and, they're interested, saying, would you be interested, if it's right, to have either a television series or a movie made out of it. And so, I mean, hopefully that works out. I've gotten really good feedback. So, but yeah, the main feedback that I did get was, this really should be, you should make this a movie.
Well, there you go. Well, hang on a sec. I'll just call Spielberg and see what he has to say for you. But yeah, amazing. I mean, that's got to be high praise, isn't it? So we'll have to keep a lookout for that as to whether it's a movie or a TV show. That's just a whole other career path for you as well, isn't it? After everything that
Yeah.
you've done. Oh my gosh, screenplay writing and everything else. But I think that one of the things that's quite memorable from all of this, and it is actually incredibly simple, is that the lid has been opened, kind of thing, right? I mean, did you know immediately that would become like the emotional hook of the whole novel?
No, not at first. No, I didn't at first. And then, like I said, some of the advanced readers were like, yeah, that was, so I think I went back and, I kind of added that and the fact that it just not anyone could open the lid. There was, a specific way and, that, it just, that did become kind of the hook.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds great. I mean, as well. Oh, okay. So, I mean, as you know, like a lot of readers, a lot of the public enjoy stories that mix conspiracy theories with real history, and it's kind of what you've done, isn't it? Right?
Yes.
Why do you think that audiences like us are so fascinated by hidden truths and all these secret histories that keep running around the place?
Um, I think they always, is it true or is it not? To be the one to say, "Oh, I proved it was true," or "Oh, I proved it was false," or just, to wonder. Um, there are a lot of books that are written that, they leave you hanging and, did it really happen? Um, like the Somerton Man, the last chapter. Um, that's one that I'm working on the next in the series now, and that's one that was really interesting to me too. And I considered opening up with that, but I decided it'd be better to start where it began. But there's, like I said, there's enough fact um, within the Somerton Man, within that mystery, to make you wonder. Wait, could it really have been this person? What caused it? What caused the death? Well, was he a spy? What was he carrying? So, I think people they do enjoy that. And um, I've gotten a lot of feedback and from the reviews and the messages and emails I've gotten, um, they've been like, I couldn't believe it. They said, I Googled this person, they really existed. And that's, this restaurant, Vultures, that's a real place. And so, yeah, I mean, to say, wow, that was true. Yeah, and to actually tie it back to the time period, the location, and the people around it. So I think that's everyone finds that interesting to say, wow, even though only part of it is true, but what part isn't? And that's kind of what catches them.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of like a gossip thing, isn't it? As you said, I knew about this way before you guys found out, and it's all, yeah. I think it's great. In order to, to do that and to stand by the water cooler or whatever, and to talk about these things. And obviously, the novel it touches on other things as well, like despair and hope, and the
Yes.
consequences of forbidden knowledge. I think this is the point, isn't it? Right?
Yes.
Do not open, all of that sort of thing. So, beneath those thriller elements, really, what themes were you most interested in exploring?
Like you said, despair and hope. Um, the diversity based on who had the amulet and what the effect that it had, even if it wasn't opened. What effect it had on people. Um, you know, some just complete obsession, and others were terror. I mean, just being around it, which is explained in the story why that had occurred. Um, I like the fact that it wasn't just based on Pandora's box. The whole way it was made, there was three myths behind it before it even got to Pandora's box. And each one of those myths had its own um, force behind the amulet. And that also kind of drove the story when in war or, when it got to World War One with Hitler and even World War Two, when Hitler came in possession of it. So, I think that how the way it changes hands and the way that it moves throughout history.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this is again where your attention to detail has managed to sort of manage that journey, right? Which again, is a very interesting. Um, I think that obviously we're starting to run out of time, David. Can you believe? I mean, the time just flies. This is incredible. It always happens. I get very upset, but um, we've got time for a couple more questions. But I mean, was there a moment then when you were doing all of this research, with the Unit 731 and all of these things, where the story was becoming kind of darker than you originally intended it to be? And if it was, I mean, what did you do about that to try and pull it back? Or I guess you wouldn't just strike it through and say, I'm not going to use that, but you try and change it, right?
Right. Yeah, I got to with Unit 731, that was probably the darkest. Um, and the more that I researched, then just the more disgusting it became. So I think I had probably a chapter, another chapter, chapter and a half of 731, Unit 731. And like you had said, I was like, that it went way, way to the dark side. And I thought that's not what the way I wanted to portray the story. So yeah, I changed that, abbreviated it, and took out some of the details just to be able to kind of keep the flow and the feel of the story the same.
So it wasn't really because it was just too awful. You just didn't want to be like sensationalize things and sort of like draw away from the book. Okay, yeah, from the main narrative. Now that makes sense. Okay, so let's just go back to a nice simple question after this 731 thing. I mean, do you think that some mysteries are better left unexplained or unexplainable even? We've got what, UFOs, we've got Bigfoot, the classics. But what do you think about that? I mean, is that something that you sat there and watched all these things with your sons rather? What do you think? Is it good to have that there as just in case, or do we really want to know the answers to these things?
I To be honest, I think it depends on the person. I know for me, I want to know the answers. I was one of those kids that when I was young, I'd get my toys and take them apart to see how they worked. And, so that was always interesting. And I mean, to me, I can't think of a single mystery that, it's better left unfound. Let's just leave it alone and let it be a mystery. I'm always interested in, did it really happen? And if it did, how did it happen?
Exactly. I'm with you on that one, I've got to say, when I was growing up, there were in the UK, there was a series of magazines, like a weekly series or a fortnight, every 2 weeks or something, series of magazines that were called The Unexplained. Okay, so UK authors of my age will understand this. And so they came out and it covered, I don't know, maybe 1, 2, 3 or 4 mysteries, spontaneous human combustion or something like that, right? And I'll never forget the pictures that they used in this magazine. And they weren't squeamish or anything, or was horrible. But I used to think as a 12 or 13-year-old, oh my gosh, why is that person's ankle there, right? And you probably know the picture I'm talking about, but it's something where I also wanted to know why and why that happened, rather than, oh my gosh, it can't just happen, right? And I'm sure that most people are like that. And I'm not going to spoil that one by letting anyone know exactly what science says about that. But anyway, okay. So to wrap things up, David, when readers finish the book, what do you hope that they think after they close that book and they go, wow. And then they turn to their partner and say, you know what? What is it that you'd like them to think?
Um, well, the way that it ended was kind of on a cliffhanger, and I've gotten that, please tell me you are following up on this. You know, um, at the ending, there's still a lot more story to tell. So I hope that they still have that desire, but um, like I said, I like the reviews and the feedback that I get where they say, I actually looked this stuff up. That person existed. This place existed. That made me wonder. So was it really there? And like I said, my wife and I spent quite a bit of time traveling, and just to make sure we were getting it factually correct. Um, and like with Ellis Island, we went to New York 2 times and spent 2, 3 days on Ellis Island getting the way that they were they were moved through Ellis Island, how they were checked, how they walked up the stairway, how their eyes were checked, how chalk was put on their collars. We took pictures of them, and several of the families and the people mentioned in the book on the boat and on Ellis Island, actually we went through the manifest. and we used those names and the stories that we could find about them. So I hope that they just get a feeling. I It spurs their interest more to say, hey, how much of this was real? Because that a lot of time was spent trying to make sure it was accurate as possible and using real people.
Brilliant. And yep, it obviously comes across, doesn't it, in the story and everything that you, yeah, as I say, the amount of attention you spent on it and crafted the whole book. So, hold on a second. Isn't it though? It's about keeping an audience and making sure that you sort of, satisfy them in one respect, but keep them coming back for more later on. So let's hope that something happens with well, at least another book, and we'll see what happens with screenplays and things like that.
Yeah, yeah. I already started on the other book. I just finished a novella, and I'm going through the first round of editing now. So that will be out in a couple months. But I started a couple weeks ago the second book in this series. So yeah, hoping to pique everyone's interest again.
Yeah, exactly. Well, no, that's great then. Good. Well, hopefully, listeners, viewers, you can obviously try and find the book. David, whereabouts is it sold, by the way?
It's sold on Amazon, Books a Million, Barnes and Noble, Walmart, Apple Books. So pretty much you can get it anywhere. The audiobook will be out next month.
Okay, well that's cool as well because people obviously like an
Yeah,
audiobook nowadays in the fast changing world that we're in. And do you have a website or something that people can sort of find out more about you?
I do. I do. It's David M. Dye, DYE, author.com.
davidmdye.author.com. Excellent. Well, guys, look David up, get in touch, send some feedback through when you finished reading the book or even halfway through. I'm sure David will love to hear from you and help you along the way if he can. But David Dye, listen, thank you for joining me on Author Conversations. I've been Chris Dabbs, your host today. And the book is Do Not Open, a historical supernatural thriller that blends maritime mystery, wartime conspiracy, mythology, and investigative suspense into a story that asks what happens when dangerous secrets are finally uncovered. Wow, this is a great book. If you enjoy atmospheric thrillers grounded in real historical mysteries and also knowing how much work David has put into the research in this, well, this is definitely one to look out for. You can find Do Not Open online now, including through Amazon, as David was just saying. And if you've enjoyed this conversation, please follow Author Conversations for more interviews with writers about the stories, ideas, and experiences behind their books. David Dye, it's been great talking to you and learning about the craft of writing a book that you've just done. And look, good luck to you. And thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this conversation, you can watch more Author Conversations here.